Welcome. We are here backstage at the Wilbur Theater on a gray day in Boston. I'm joined by Billy Bragg and Joe Henry. They are on their Shine a Light tour. Guys, how's the day been going so far?
So far, so good. Certainly for me. I live in Southern California, and I like a good blast of autumn weather, and we're having it.
Well, that is good. That is good. So, welcome to Boston. You guys are on tour playing songs from your new album, Shine a Light, field recordings from the Great American Railroad. Tell us a little bit about what inspired this recording and how you went about making the album.
Well, I have an interest in railroad songs that goes back to an interest in skiffle. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to record some of these songs, and I thought an interesting way to do it would be to perhaps take the songs back to where they came from. Mm-hmm. And I've wanted to work with Joe for a long time. Joe and I have been friends since the 1980s, and we've worked on a sort of few projects. Joe's invited me to appear on events that he was curating, and then he produced my last album. Mm-hmm. So I thought it would be, and he has a great appreciation of American roots music, and not only is he a great producer and a great songwriter performer, but he's also really good at arranging songs, and I needed a little bit of that. I thought that might help out, and I thought he might be a good person to share a sleeping compartment with.
That's always something to consider when you're going on a long tour like that. Now, what was some of the biggest challenges when recording in these spaces?
Well, the biggest challenge was just time. Mm-hmm. But as soon as you sort of acknowledge that time is a constraint, it's also one more color on your palette. You know, limitation can be your best friend. You know, if you've got 22 minutes on a platform in St. Louis to record a song, you get focused really quickly, and you understand very well what are the priorities and what are just distractions. So, the challenge is just trying to stay focused on the material, to invite in the outside world, but not let it overtake the process.
And then, what effect do you think that this sort of had on the album, and was that the effect that you intended it to have, if that makes sense?
Well, the effect it had was to kind of create a narrative. I mean, when you're listening to the songs and you understand sonically about what you're hearing, that this is happening in real time, in transit, in the environment that we're depicting, you're kind of creating a sonic movie. And, I think that translates very well to what's going on. It would have been a very different experience had we just gone into a recording studio and closed the doors and recorded clean and pristine versions of old folk songs that we all know in our sleep. We really wanted to revitalize them for ourselves and get them into the air and remind people that they are engageable and real-time events.
Perfect. And then, so the first guest that I had on this show about 3 years ago was the incredible Frank Turner. And when I first played Frank for my boss, who was sort of a kid of the 80s, the first thing he said was, "That sounds like Billy Bragg," and that's sort of how I stumbled upon your catalog, Billy.
Well, that's the strange thing about Frank is most times now when I Google my name, up comes a review of Frank Turner, and someone's calling him the new Billy Bragg, and I really feel sorry for him because I think he's from a different time, he's from a different tradition, and he approaches things in a different way to me. And I think it's a bit unfair of him. I think he's something else altogether, and I have a lot of respect for Frank. And when we have the opportunity to play together, as we have done a few times, at left field at Glastonbury, and when he played Wembley Stadium, he invited me up to come along. I do everything I can to dispel the fact he's anything like me. I sing with my Cockney accent, and I play my electric guitar really loud, and I think to myself, hopefully, Frank, this will give you a bit of breathing space. You must be like a monkey on your back having to be compared to me all the time.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, do you have a lot of sort of kids my age? Is that how they get into you, if that makes sense? Like, is that a common thing? Or?
Well, I'm not sure. I mean, I think one of the ways that kids do get into me is that I'm still political when a lot of people aren't. So people are looking for a bit of political music, they kind of find me.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's sort of something I was going to ask. It seems like celebrities today are political, but not a lot of political music is being written, and you both are, very political songwriters. Why do you think that is the case now, that people aren't writing as much protest political music?
Well, my hunch, and it is only a hunch, is that things have changed since when we started writing songs. In the 20th century, music was the only social medium available to us. Mm-hmm. So, when I was 19 and I was angry about the world, the only choice I had really was to learn to play guitar, write songs and do gigs. Mm-hmm. Now, if you're 19 and angry, there's a number of things you can do. You can have a phone in my pocket, you can film something and edit the film on your phone. Never mind tweeting and Facebook and all that kind of stuff. So the need to get out there and sing songs about what's happening, it's not so important. So in that sense, I think music has lost its vanguard role. It's not now trying to articulate everything that young people feel. Mm-hmm. But it still has that role. I mean, you have to see what Beyonce did with Black Lives Matter.
Well, exactly.
Over the last year or so, to realise that music does still have a power. And also your man Copernic kneeling down during the national anthem to see how powerful that moment was. Music is capable of articulating those moments. So the ability is still there, but it's not where everybody's gathered. I think that's our problem with concern to writing political songs. It's not where people come to hear the news, it's where people come to be entertained. So what we try and do is when we entertain people is to give them some of the news, and you'll hear a bit of that tonight.
True. And then sort of, Joe, you've been sort of embroiled in this in 18 months, but Billy, you picked certainly an interesting time to come to America. What do you guys make of everything that's going on right now? I mean, between Kaepernick and between, the election that we have coming up, how important is it to you guys to be involved in that?
It's important for all of us as citizens to be present as citizens. I mean, there's no such thing as no politics. Anybody who professes to be uninterested and apolitical, that itself is a very definite political statement. I think it really just goes back to being a member of community. We live in a really big country and it sprawls, and it's really easy for people to forget that we really are a community. Smaller countries, just like living in a small town, you can't miss that there's an impact to your presence and your voice. But in this country, we get seduced into believing that anything we could say or do could matter. And I think there's a certain amount of complacency that has been building for a long time, coupled with an enormous amount of fear and panic. And that's a pretty heady recipe.
I think for me it's a slightly different experience than this too, because we've just recently had the experience of Brexit. And in some ways that's quite similar to what's going on here in the United States of America, in the sense that none of us believed it would happen. We looked at the possibility of leaving the European Union, trashing our relationship with our closest trading partners and destroying our reputation as a pragmatic people. And we thought, no, we'd never be so stupid as to do that. So when I hear people say to me, don't worry, Trump's going to lose, I'm like, please don't be complacent. We were complacent. None of us believed this would happen. And now we find ourselves in a situation where we're, well, nobody really knows where it's going to go. I mean, there's the leader of the Conservative Party said that she's going to begin the negotiations with the European Union next year, but where that will lead us, we're in kind of limbo for a while. So the takeaway thing from Brexit for the United States of America is please don't be complacent about Trump being so foolish that he will lose the election, because that it needs everybody to get involved to make sure that doesn't happen.
Well, and that's interesting, because one of the things that I've seen is, electing Trump would be, and this is a direct quotation, the Megxit from the New World Order, which is sort of an interesting and scary thing. But have you been able to feel the effects of Brexit already back home? Yeah,
we have. There's been a huge rise in bigotry on the streets, on racist attacks. I saw a journalist went to a terrible thing happened in a town called Harlow in Essex. A group of youths beat a man to death because he spoke in his native language, which is Polish, and obviously Polish workers have the right to come under the European regulations to come and work in our country. A journalist of colour went out there to report, and he was openly called in the street. It's probably not as loaded as the N-word here, but it certainly is something I haven't heard since the 1970s. They referred to him as a PAKI, and I haven't heard that shouted in the street since my teens, really, when there was a lot of racism about. So I was genuinely shocked that people would openly shout that to people in the street, because people who come from the Indian subcontinent, from Pakistan, for example, have absolutely nothing to do with the European Union. This is just a general hatred of and bigotry towards any immigrants. And I feel that should Trump win, the people who have those feelings in the United States of America, and let's not kid ourselves, they're everywhere, and every generation has to work out how to deal with them, those people will be emboldened. Those people who want to wave the southern flag will be heartily emboldened by a Trump victory, and you've got to take on board and realise what the effects of that will be. I think we're already seeing it. I don't know if you've been following the Ryder Cup, but the American supporters of the Ryder Cup have been verbally abusing the European players already, and I think there's an element of the sort of Trump hysteria is playing into that in some way. So you must be aware of that.
Definitely. And one of the questions that my boss had sort of asked you, Billy, is back in a while, you weren't looking for a New England. You got one, but sort of back then, why weren't you looking for a New England?
Well, I wrote that song at the tail end of punk rock when I realised that it's all very well wanting to change the world, but every now and then you just need a hug. And I think that really has been my core message over the years. That yes, it's all well and good, championing the forces of change, but you still, it's a question of sort of like, you just need that human side to it. Otherwise, if it's all life isn't all politics.
Totally, totally. And then so you guys have both been making music for quite a while. What do you think would be the biggest change in the industry since you got into the industry, sort of that you've been able to witness?
Well, I think the biggest change that comes to mind for me is the arrival of digital technology. Not so much I'm talking about being able to share files and steal them easily. You know, the only reason that hasn't happened to the film industry is that the way that it's happened to the music industry is because the files are too big for people to pass movies around like we trade songs around. But that's not what I'm talking about. The fact that any kid with a laptop can go into their room and record whatever song they might write. They're not beholden to a record label to give them permission to be a songwriter, to call themselves an artist. That's the positive side of the digital wave. Record labels no longer own the field. When I first began, you had to beg, borrow, and steal and drop to a knee just for the scrappiest budget from a record label to go make some demos, to even understand and to hear for yourself what you might mean to do. I think it's amazing that digital has allowed people the freedom to create. I was on a producer's panel once, and some music journalist in the audience was sort of lamenting exactly what I just described. They said, the problem with the digital world is that any kid with a laptop can just go down in his basement and make a record. And I said, yes, but what the upside of that is that any kid with a laptop can go down to the basement and make a record. He doesn't need your permission to do it. He doesn't need your validation for it to be worthwhile.
Which is, a total benefit, I think, definitely to the music industry.
Amen to that, yeah.
And then so, on a similar note, you guys have been doing interviews for a while. They must get boring. What do you wish that us journalists would ask you?
I'm not bored with anybody who's asking a sincere question.
Oh, good.
I'm not. I understand that there's some basic things that people need to understand if they're interested at all about what we're doing. And it would be it'd be very dismissive of me to suggest that I would be bored with a conversation. The same words repeated over and over in a different context take on different meaning. If my wife tells me every day, if she told me yesterday that she loves me, and she tells me today that she loves me, that's not, that's news. Because a day has gone by, we've lived more life, and she's affirming something that today needs to be re-ratified. Because it's the same words doesn't mean it's the same news. If you know what I mean.
We this record that we're working on at the moment has a narrative to it, and we need to try and illuminate that narrative. We want people to come on a journey with us, so we're quite happy to talk about it. But bottom line, I think both Joe and I, Joe's currently writing some sleeve notes. He's written a book. I've written a book. We've both of us written for newspapers. Bottom line, we're communicators. Whether we're writing a song, doing a performance, penning something for the papers, or talking to your listeners today, we want to communicate. That's the bottom line. So we're happy to do this.
Perfect.
In fact, there's a queue of journalists out the door at the moment. Wait, so why don't you wrap up and let's get on with it?
No, certainly. So these will be my last question. Who are you guys listening to on the road? What's been on your playlist?
Well, Van Morrison has a new record out yesterday, I think. Bon Iver has a new record out. So I've first opportunity tomorrow morning. We're catching a flight about 2 o'clock. I'm going to be in town trying to find a record shop to get hold of their records. I'm an old school kind of guy. I like to listen to it in the van.
Nice.
I haven't listened to anything in the ride because I've had some writing responsibilities, and I've had rarely a moment of that kind of compartmentalized alone time other than the drives. So I look forward to hearing the new Van record and the new Bon Iver record.
I'll buy it for you tomorrow, Joe.
Thank you.
Perfect. Well, thank you both very much, Billy Bragg, Joe Henry. Have a great show.
Thank you.